My name is Emily Roberts, and the day my sister looked me straight in the eye and said, "You've never been part of this family," before shoving me out the door, I thought my life was over. She took our father's house, his $33 million estate, and left me in a cheap roadside motel with nothing but a suitcase and the echo of her cruelty. 3 days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, uncovering the truth Victoria had buried. The will she flaunted was nothing but a lie, and the sister who once called me useless had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought I would always be a pawn, but she was about to find out I had been holding the queen all along. If you're watching this, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Because trust me, this story isn't just about betrayal or money. It's about how I went from the abandoned, crippled little sister cast aside by my own flesh and blood to the only one holding all the cards. My father died on a cold autumn morning when the last yellow leaves were still drifting across the porch. I remember the phone ringing at 6 a.m., pulling me out of a restless sleep. On the other end was the shaky voice of a doctor from the hospital telling me his heart had stopped. I gripped the phone so tightly it hurt, as though all the air in the room had vanished. He was the last person in this family I could lean on, even though that bond had always been undermined and dismissed by my sister, Victoria. The funeral was held in the house where I grew up. That big home once overflowed with laughter and the smell of Dad's morning coffee, but that day it was heavy with silence and coldness. Victoria and her husband Kevin stood at the doorway with stern faces, clutching a stack of papers she called a will. I had never seen it, nor had I ever once heard my father mention it. But the moment the funeral ended, Victoria declared that the house and every cent of Dad's $33 million belonged to her. I froze, too shocked to speak, and before I could react, Victoria turned to me with eyes so cold I felt like a stranger in my own home. "You've never been part of this family," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. Before I could explain or protest, my own sister had already called a taxi, shoved a cheap cloth bag with a few pieces of clothing into my hands, and pushed me out the door. I was taken straight to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, where the air reeked of damp mold and the sheets looked like they hadn't been changed in years. I sat in silence on the sagging mattress, staring up at the stained ceiling, with Victoria's words echoing over and over in my head. Not a single tear fell, because the pain had already gone beyond what I could cry out. In that dark, suffocating room, memories of my father flooded back so vividly that it felt like I was reliving them. I remembered the afternoons he took me to the park near our house, teaching me how to watch the kites and telling me life was just like that. If you want to fly high, you have to hold the string firmly, but also know when to loosen your grip so the wind can lift you. I remembered the days he would secretly slip a few bills into my math book, smiling and saying it was a reward for my hard work. And I remembered the way he held my hand when I went in for my first surgery, his eyes red with worry, but his voice steady with encouragement. "Emily, you're so much stronger than you think." I never imagined my father would leave me so soon, and even less that he would leave me in a situation like this. Yet Victoria insisted it was all according to his wishes, that he had chosen to give her everything because I was incapable and unworthy. Those words cut into me like 100 tiny knives. I didn't believe her, but in that moment, I had no proof to fight back. All I had was an enormous emptiness, losing my father, my home, and my family all at once. The first days in that motel, I lived in a haze, half awake, half numb. I wandered through the streets, watching couples walk hand in hand, watching shop lights glow brightly, while I had nothing but a few crumpled bills in my pocket. I kept asking myself if my father truly believed I wasn't worthy. But then I remembered the way he looked at me, the words he used to say, and I knew something wasn't right. That man had never once made a distinction between me and Victoria. In fact, more than once, I'd caught him sighing over my sister's greed and selfishness. One evening, I rummaged through my bag and found the old watch my father used to wear. It was the only thing of his I had left, and as I looked at its scratched face, I suddenly realized I couldn't just sit back and let myself be erased from the life my father had built for me every single day. I had to find the truth. But before I thought about the next step, I sat there for a long time, closed my eyes, and whispered, "I won't let your words be twisted. I won't let you down." The next morning, as sunlight cut through the dusty window, I sat up with only one thought in mind. I needed to see my father's lawyer. He must have prepared a will, and I had to know what it really said. A name surfaced in my memory. Mr. Carter, my father's longtime attorney. Since I was a child, I'd seen him visit our house, always in a neat gray suit, speaking in a deep, steady voice that carried both warmth and resolve. I searched for his number in the old contacts on the cracked phone my father had left behind. My heart pounded as I pressed call, caught between hope and fear. After a few rings, a deep male voice answered. "Hello, Carter speaking." I took a breath and introduced myself as Emily, Robert's youngest daughter. At the mention of my name, his voice softened. "Emily, I've been waiting for you. I knew sooner or later you would come." We arranged to meet at his office. My hands trembled as I rode the bus, unsure of what I was about to hear. His office was on the 7th floor of a stately red brick building with tall windows that welcomed the morning light. Mr. Carter rose to greet me, his silver hair glowing under the lamp, his eyes stern but filled with compassion. "Your father trusted me deeply," he began. "And I've been waiting for the day you'd walk through that door because I knew Victoria would never allow the truth to come out easily." I sat down, my hands clenched together so tightly they were damp with sweat. Mr. Carter pulled out a thick file, locked away in a steel cabinet. "This is Mr. Robert's will," he said, placing it in front of me. My whole body went rigid, my heart pounding as if it had stopped altogether. Slowly, he opened the pages and began to read. His voice was steady, firm. According to the will, Emily inherits the house and 70% of the estate, which amounts to $23 million. Victoria is granted $10 million, with one mandatory condition. She must treat and care for her younger sister, who has been in a wheelchair since childhood, with love and kindness. If she fails to do so, Victoria's share will automatically transfer to Emily. I was stunned. My head rang as though 1,000 voices were colliding at once. My father had seen everything. He had known of Victoria's greed long ago and had written this clause as his final test. But instead of honoring it, Victoria had hidden the truth, forged a false will, and cast me out of my own home. Tears spilled down my cheeks, not only because the truth had finally been revealed, but because I realized just how deeply my father had trusted me. Mr. Carter looked at me, his voice softening. "Robert often said he feared Victoria would never overcome her greed. He believed you were the one who would carry the true values of this family." Oh, I sat there trembling, my mind flashing back to childhood. My father had stepped in countless times when Victoria snatched my toys or deliberately pushed my wheelchair into the corner so I couldn't join family gatherings. I remembered one time, when I was 10, Victoria screamed, "Why does everyone always have to care about her? She'll never do anything useful." My father was so angry it was the first time I'd ever seen him yell at his eldest daughter. He made her stand in front of me and apologize. His eyes back then were sad yet resolute, as if he had already seen the seeds of selfishness sprouting. And now, in the words of this will, his worries were written down line by line. I asked Mr. Carter why I hadn't been informed about the reading of the will. He sighed, resting his hand on the file. "I sent invitations to both of you. But after the funeral, Victoria came to my office and told me you were too grief-stricken and wanted to decline. She even signed a forged authorization in your name to receive a copy. I was suspicious, but when I tried calling you, your number couldn't be reached. So I waited. I hoped one day you would come. And, thankfully, you did." Hearing this, I felt the blood rush to my face. Victoria had orchestrated everything, carefully plotting to erase me from existence. A surge of fury and determination rose in my chest. I was no longer the girl shoved into a cheap roadside motel. I was the rightful heir, the daughter my father had placed his faith in. And I would not let anyone trample on that. I told Mr. Carter everything Victoria and her husband had done to me, my hands trembling but my voice steady. He nodded, his eyes stern. Emily, what you've been through isn't just unfair, it's criminal. Victoria exploited your disability, using your vulnerability to manipulate and dispossess you. That is legally defined as abuse of a disabled person, and concealing the will, forging an authorization in your name that is outright fraud. His words cut deep, but at the same time, they freed me. It hurt to accept that my sister, the one who had once sat beside me at family dinners, had become my greatest enemy. Yet I felt relief too, because I no longer had to wonder if my father had truly abandoned me. The truth was that he had protected me until his very last breath, leaving justice behind in the carefully written lines of his will. The next day, I returned to Mr. Carter's office to sign the confirmation documents. With every stroke of the pen, it felt as if I was releasing another fragment of a buried memory. I signed my name Emily Roberts with overwhelming emotion. As soon as the paperwork was complete, Mr. Carter said firmly, "From this moment on, you are the rightful owner of the house and the entire $33 million estate. Victoria and her husband Kevin, due to their fraud and their cruelty, have forfeited all rights. The law will take care of the rest." I sat in silence, my mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. Was this the revenge I had longed for? Was this the justice my father had prepared for me? More than anything, I felt an aching sadness. Victoria was still my sister, my own flesh and blood. We had once played together in the garden, once shared slices of cake our father brought home. But greed had consumed it all, transforming her into someone willing to destroy me for a handful of dollar bills. That very morning, Mr. Carter called the Financial Crimes Division and laid out all the evidence, the real will, the forged authorization, and my sworn statement. The police responded quickly. A task force was immediately formed to conduct an emergency review of Victoria and Kevin's bank accounts. I can still remember the moment I heard the inspector's voice over the phone. "We will issue an order to freeze all related accounts and stop any transactions before they have the chance to move the money." Hearing those words, it felt as though a crushing weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time, I felt a powerful force standing on my side. At the same time, the banks received directives. Kevin, once a high-ranking figure in the investment world with plenty of connections in the financial system, suddenly found every familiar door shutting in his face. Accounts that had once swelled with millions were frozen, and their elite credit cards were rendered useless. I could almost picture Victoria's face as she tried to swipe her card in some upscale restaurant, only to see the words, "Transaction declined." Her arrogance and false composure would crumble in an instant. That afternoon, I unexpectedly received a call from Victoria herself. Her name lit up on my cracked phone screen, and for a moment I almost didn't want to answer. But then I remembered my father's words. "You don't need to fear the truth." I pressed accept. Her voice came through immediately, dripping with a sweetness so fake it almost stung. "Emily, my little sister. Can we talk like sisters again?" I gripped the phone tighter, forcing my tone to stay calm. "What do you want?" Victoria let out a short, cold laugh, then slipped back into the tone I knew too well, half reproach, half manipulation. "I know you're with Carter. He's always hated me, so of course he's filling your head with lies. We're family, Emily. Think about it, what are you going to do with such a massive fortune? You have no experience, no connections. Kevin and I are the ones who know how to manage it. All you need to do is listen to me, and you'll live comfortably. Don't fight me, you'll never win." I listened carefully, and all I heard in her voice was the same old manipulation, the poison that had haunted me since childhood. There wasn't a trace of remorse. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and answered slowly. "Do you remember the condition in the will? You were supposed to treat me with kindness. Instead, you threw me out of the house, humiliated me, and forged documents. Father foresaw your greed. And now you've lost everything, not because of me, but because of yourself." On the other end, Victoria went silent for a few seconds. Then she burst out laughing, a sharp, chilling sound. "You're so naive, Emily. Do you really think a piece of paper can stand against me? Do you think the police will side with a crippled, weak girl over me and Kevin? You forget who holds the connections in the banking world. I trembled with anger, but forced myself to stay composed. My reply was firm, almost clipped. You're wrong. This time, no one believes you anymore. The police have the evidence, the banks have frozen all your accounts, the truth will win. And Father, even though he's gone, left me with his final protection. You can't escape. With that, I hung up. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking uncontrollably, but inside me there was a strange sense of relief. I had faced her. I had spoken the words I'd been silenced from saying all my life. Later that evening, Mr. Carter received the official notice. An investigation order had been issued, and the police had begun tracking Victoria and Kevin's every move. Evidence of their document forgery was being compiled, and an emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Mr. Carter looked at me with one of his rare smiles. You did well. You're no longer the victim, Emily. You're the one standing up for the truth. That night, I sat alone in the small room, the yellow light casting a glow over the stack of files on the table. I thought of my father, of the days he carefully planned every detail to protect me after he was gone. I knew this battle was far from over. But for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I had the law on my side, the truth as my weapon, and my father's memory as my strength. Victoria might still try to manipulate, but this time, I would never bend. 2 days after my last call with Victoria, the news began to leak from the police. Mr. Carter told me with calm composure, though I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. The arrest warrant has been issued. The police are just waiting for the right moment. I sat in silence, my heart racing. For years, I had been the weak one, always trampled and robbed by Victoria. Now, everything was shifting, and justice was closer than ever. That very day, Victoria walked into an upscale restaurant downtown, wrapped in a dazzling red dress. She had reserved a table to celebrate with her closest friends. Wine flowed into glasses, and her arrogant smile remained fixed on her face. She had no idea the police were already closing in. As the waiter arrived with appetizers, 4 plainclothes officers approached the table. The moment cold steel snapped around her wrists, Victoria screamed, her voice cracking, "You've got the wrong person. I'm the rightful account holder, I have my own lawyer." But her protests only rang out against the murmur of the restaurant, where curious, bewildered eyes turned toward her. The pride she had clung to shattered like a wine glass crashing onto the tiled floor. Meanwhile, Kevin, the husband who so proudly called himself a financial genius, was at his investment firm. Sitting in his glass-walled office on the 10th floor, he frantically dialed contacts, trying to funnel money into offshore accounts. But before he could act, the police stormed in. His computers were sealed, his files confiscated, and Kevin himself was handcuffed in front of his colleagues. A few young employees stood frozen, unable to believe that the man who once bragged about million-dollar strategies was now bowing his head as he was dragged out like a petty con man. The initial results of the investigation left me both shocked and chilled. Kevin was never the brilliant investor he had painted himself to be, but a man with a long criminal history in financial fraud. He had once been suspected of involvement in money laundering and falsifying banking documents in 2 other states, but had cleverly slipped away thanks to connections and deception. This time, however, his collusion with Victoria, his wife, in forging the authorization and concealing my father's will became undeniable evidence. The police stated firmly, "This couple staged an organized financial fraud. The charges are more than enough to bring them before federal court." Hearing those words, I felt both fury and a heavy sense of release. Victoria had willingly thrown herself into ruin instead of holding on to the chance my father had given her to rebuild her life. Kevin's mask had fallen completely. He was nothing more than a man exploiting my sister's blind love to drag her down with him. The day the police made everything official, I returned to my father's old house. The large wooden door creaked open, dust thick on the floor, the familiar damp smell rising up. But in my eyes, It no longer felt like the cold, lifeless house I had seen on the day of his funeral. I took a deep breath and began to clean. Every pillow, every picture frame, every piece of furniture carried memories. I saw my father's coat still hanging in the closet, his shoes lined neatly beneath the shelf. I touched them carefully, and tears slipped down before I could stop them. In the corner of the living room, the very spot where Victoria had once stood pointing at me, ordering me out, I stood for a long time. I remembered her cruel words, the helplessness that crushed me as I was pushed out onto the street. But now I had come back not as the castaway, but as the rightful heir of this house. I gathered all of Victoria's belongings, her expensive dresses, high heels, luxury perfumes, and packed them into cardboard boxes. I wasn't angry anymore. I simply felt they didn't belong here. Her things were nothing more than remnants of her downfall. As the evening light poured through the window, I sat in my father's old study. On the desk lay the leather notebook he used to jot things down. I opened it and found his messy handwriting notes about investment plans, brief reminders like, "Emily needs more sketchbooks. Victoria lost her temper again today. I hope the girls will find a way to understand each other." I closed the notebook, my hands trembling, but inside me a quiet strength began to rise. I knew from that moment on, I would no longer live in the shadow of manipulation. Victoria and Kevin had been arrested, the investigation was underway, and justice was drawing near. Emily, was no longer the cast-off girl in a wheelchair. I was the survivor, the heir, the one rewriting my own story. And this house, where my father once told me, "Your real strength lies in your heart," had finally returned to its rightful owner. I spent an entire week in my father's home after Victoria and Kevin's arrest, cleaning and reflecting on the future. In those days, I rarely left the house. The study was where I lingered the most. It was spacious, its dark wood walls lined with shelves of books and financial documents. On the desk was still the faint ring of a coffee cup, beside the thick journals he had written late into the night. I sat in his chair, gazing out the window where light streamed through the trees in the garden, and for a moment I imagined he was still there leaning forward to write, pausing to ask if I needed anything. But then I sighed, laid my hand on the desk, and whispered, "I'll make this space my own, Dad, a place where I can tell my story." I decided to transform the study into a writing studio. Since childhood, writing had been my greatest comfort. The pages carried the weight of my loneliness and the words I never dared to speak. I cleared away some of the shelves of financial records and replaced them with a light wooden desk, a brand new laptop, and neat stacks of blank notebooks. I hung a few abstract paintings I had created during my long years of healing. In the corner, I added a soft armchair where I could read or simply sit and think. Every time I walked in, I felt as though I was stepping into a new chapter, not the domain of a busy patriarch consumed by numbers, but the space of a young woman learning to find her own voice. News of Victoria and Kevin's arrest spread quickly. The local papers were the first to cover it, then larger outlets picked it up with headlines like, "Forged Will Scandal, The Greedy Sister and the Shady Past of Investor Kevin." I stumbled upon my own picture on the front page, beneath the caption, "Emily Roberts, the forgotten heiress who took back justice." At first, it felt strange, as if my story no longer belonged solely to me. But when those articles were shared thousands of times across social media, I began reading countless comments from strangers. "This young woman is so strong. I was financially exploited by my family too, and this story makes me feel less alone." Every word felt like a stream of warmth seeping into my heart. One morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, television stations, even small podcasts wanted to interview me. They wanted to hear my story firsthand, what it felt like to be cast out, the journey of reclaiming justice, and the lessons for anyone facing financial abuse within their family. I sat in my newly finished studio, looked around the room, and thought about it for a long time. I didn't want to turn myself into some kind of entertainment spectacle, but I also realized I had been given a rare opportunity to tell the truth, not only to clear my father's name, but to warn others. I began by experimenting with short recordings, sharing pieces of my emotions and posting them on a free podcast platform. The very first episode I titled, "When Family Becomes the Most Dangerous Place." In it, I recounted the night Victoria threw me out of the house, the insults that pierced like knives, and the moment I sat in a shabby motel room remembering my father. I didn't cry. My voice was calm, but every word carried weight. Within just a week, that episode had spread widely, with thousands of listens and hundreds of comments from people who had gone through similar pain. They said my voice had spoken aloud the words they never could. At the same time, social media began to speak of me as a small symbol of resilience. A photo of me sitting in my wheelchair inside the new studio, golden light washing over my face, spread everywhere with the caption, "She lost everything, but she still rose." The flood of encouragement left me both stunned and deeply moved. I realized I wasn't just surviving my ordeal, I was giving hope to others. At night, I would reopen the comments and read them again and again. One person wrote, "Emily, I once had my inheritance stolen by my brother. Hearing your story gave me the courage to finally meet with a lawyer." Another said, "Thank you for reminding me that family doesn't always mean love. I'm learning to set boundaries now." I smiled through tears, knowing that what I was doing mattered. The house grew brighter each day. I planted flowers along the porch, hung new curtains, painted the walls a warm cream. Each small change felt like a declaration. The place once full of shadows would now be a home of light, and I, Emily, would be the one to keep that flame alive. Then, on a quiet Monday evening, as I sat in my studio typing softly on the keyboard, a sudden knock echoed at the door, urgent yet hesitant. Outside, the porch light cast its glow on a tall, thin figure in a dark dress, a face I could never mistake. Victoria. I froze for a few seconds, my heart pounding. After months of detention, I never expected her to show up at my doorstep, especially with the trial still looming. When I opened the door, she stood there, her eyes sunken with dark circles, her face gaunt and hollow. She was no longer the glamorous, arrogant sister draped in expensive clothes, but a weary woman with tangled hair and an expression that flickered between rage and desperation. Her voice rasped. "Emily, I need to talk to you. I have no one else." I stayed silent, neither stepping aside to let her in nor shutting the door in her face. I wanted to see what she would say. Victoria glanced around the porch, the very place where my father used to sit sipping tea each morning, then sighed, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, truly sorry. Can you withdraw the lawsuit? I shouldn't have thrown you out, I shouldn't have forged the will. But you have to understand, I did it all because I wanted to protect the family. Kevin told me that if you managed the estate, you'd be swindled, taken advantage of. You're disabled, inexperienced, you don't know finance, you don't have connections. I only wanted to keep everything in my hands to keep it safe." I listened, but each word landed in my ears like shards of ice. Victoria hadn't changed, an apology wrapped in excuses. I remembered every second of her shoving me out of the house, the cruel sentence she spat at me. "You've never been part of this family." And now, her sorry felt like a flimsy sheet draped over the bottomless pit of her selfishness. "Victoria," I answered slowly, my eyes never leaving hers. "You say it was to protect me. But the moment Father died, you cast me onto the street. Was that protection? You forged my signature to steal the will. Was that protection? Or was it all just the greed Father saw in you long ago?" Victoria flinched, her lips pressed tight, but then she let out a short, brittle laugh. "Father always favored you. He always pitied you, always treated you like some fragile burden that needed to be protected. And me? I had to carry everything on my own, had to prove myself. He never once saw me as worthy." I stayed quiet for a moment, then stepped back into the house and returned with a tablet. On it was a video file Mr. Carter had given me after my father's death, a recording he made in the lawyer's office just weeks before he passed away. I set the tablet on the wooden table on the porch and pressed play. The screen lit up, and my father's face appeared, so familiar it made my throat tighten. He wore a simple white shirt, his voice deep and steady, but his eyes resolute. "Victoria, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. I need to make this clear, I never hated you, but I worried. Your greed could cost you everything. I saw it in you from the time you were a child, always grasping, always wanting more than others. I hoped you would change, but you never listened. Emily may have a disability, but she has a pure and kind heart. I trust Emily to protect the values I leave behind. If you cannot love your sister, then you are not worthy of any inheritance. His words fell heavy, like the toll of a bell. I turned to see Victoria trembling, her hands gripping the porch railing so tightly her knuckles went white. Tears began spilling down her face, not the proud tears she once used to manipulate, but the tears of collapse. She sank onto the steps, sobbing. He really thought that. Father never trusted me. I moved closer, sitting across from her, my voice calm. Father always loved you, but he couldn't ignore the greed that consumed you. He believed that if you didn't change, you would lose everything. And you proved him right. How? Victoria buried her face in her hands, her sobs breaking the silence of the night. The arrogance, the mask of control gone. What remained was only a woman realizing her mistakes too late. Her voice was hoarse as she choked out. It was all because of greed. I wanted so badly to be recognized. I was terrified of standing behind you. And in the end, I lost everything. I looked at my sister, the one who had hurt me so deeply, but also the one bound to me by blood. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no hatred, only a quiet sadness. Softly, I whispered. Father was right. Greed never brings happiness. It only leaves you alone. Victoria lifted her tear-streaked face and gave a faint nod. For the first time, I saw her acknowledge her mistakes, but I also knew it was far too late. Regret could not undo the damage, and justice was still waiting ahead. No apology would ever erase what she had done. That night, after Victoria left in silence, I sat for a long time on the porch, staring at the darkened screen of the tablet. My father's voice still echoed in my heart, a constant reminder. Live honestly, protect the values he had trusted me with. I knew the road before me was still long, but at least I had brought the truth to light, the truth my father wanted me to carry until his very last breath. One early winter morning, when the cold crept through every crack of the house, I heard the doorbell ring. I assumed it was another reporter or perhaps a curious neighbor. But when I opened the door, standing before me was a woman I had never seen before. She held herself tall, exuding authority, a luxurious fur coat draped across her shoulders. Her silver hair was neatly combed, her eyes bright yet chilling. She introduced herself in a slow, commanding tone. I am Eleanor, Kevin's mother. Oh. I hesitated for a moment. There was something in her gaze that sent a chill down my spine, not loud aggression, but a quiet force, like an old wolf that had survived many battles. I invited her inside, and we sat across from each other in the living room. Morning light streamed through the glass windows, illuminating the deep lines etched across her face, each one a testament to a lifetime of cunning and calculation. Eleanor spoke first, wasting no time. Emily, I came here with an offer. Withdraw the lawsuit, and you'll have $5 million in your account by the end of the week. No questions asked, no strings attached. All you need to do is forget this case ever happened. She pulled a thick envelope from her handbag and laid it on the table, her tone calm, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. I looked at the envelope, my heart pounding, but I kept my gaze steady. Slowly, I replied, do you really think money can buy the truth? Do you believe $5 million is enough for me to sell the justice my father left behind? Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who believed she held the knife by the handle. Emily, you're far too naive. Justice doesn't put food on the table. The only things that endure are power and money. If you refuse, you won't just lose this money, you could lose everything. Because... She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I know a secret about your father. A secret that, if revealed, would turn all the assets you're clinging to into a burden, worthless overnight. I straightened in my chair, forcing my voice calm even as my chest burned. What are you talking about? I asked. Her eyes glinted with menace as she tilted her head. Robert wasn't the flawless man you believed. He had questionable ties in business. If I expose that to the media or the authorities, they'll reopen every investigation into the origins of his wealth. And trust me, Emily, you don't want to see that money labeled dirty and seized in its entirety. I clenched my fists, feeling the blood rush to my face. To me, my father had always been a man of integrity, devoted and selfless. The thought of him being tied to something corrupt stunned me, but I knew I couldn't show weakness in front of Eleanor. My answer was firm. If you truly had proof, you'd have revealed it long ago. You're not here to warn me, you're here to blackmail me, and I will never accept that. Her smile vanished, replaced by a terrifying coldness. She rose to her feet, slipped the envelope back into her bag, and said in a low, cutting voice, "Emily, you're young. You don't yet understand how ruthless this world is. Someone like you will be crushed. I gave you a chance to live in peace, and you turned it down. Fine, the day will come when you regret it." She turned and walked out, leaving me frozen in the room. Her threat still echoed in my ears. "A secret about your father." My hand trembled against the table, my eyes staring blankly ahead. Part of me wanted to dismiss it outright, to believe Eleanor had fabricated the story just to shake me. But another part of me ached with doubt. What if she was telling the truth? What if father really had something to hide? That night, I sat in my newly remade studio, the warm light spilling onto a blank page. I couldn't write a single word. My mind was consumed with the image of my father, the man who had taught me honesty, who once held me close and said, "Always be yourself. Don't let anyone change that." How could someone like him be tied to shady business? I pulled out his old notebooks and read through the scribbled lines he left behind. Most were filled with investment notes, reminders of daily life. But the more I read, the more I noticed gaps, long stretches of time when he had been away on business trips he never explained in detail. The seed of doubt began to gnaw at me. And I knew I couldn't sit still. If Eleanor's threat was real, I had to uncover the truth myself. If she had lied, I still needed evidence to expose her bluff and stop her from using it against me. So I decided to start digging into my father's past, his connections, his contracts, the mysterious trips he took. I needed to know who my father truly was, and what secret, if any, had been buried beneath the image of a devoted man. That night, in the darkness, I whispered, "Father, if there's something I don't know, let me find it. I'm not afraid of the truth. I'm only afraid of people twisting it into a weapon against me." I began my investigation carefully, as if walking across thin ice, knowing one misstep could shatter everything and pull me under. I couldn't involve the police, not with Eleanor's threat looming over me. If a secret truly existed, I had to understand it before others could turn it into ammunition. I couldn't share it on social media either, not while thousands of strangers were looking to me as a symbol of resilience. I could only rely on myself and a few of my father's old friends, the ones he had once trusted deeply. The first clue came from the leather-bound notebooks left in my father's study. I turned each page, tracing numbers, cross-checking them with the dates of his long absences. There were business trips that lasted weeks, yet all he wrote were vague notes like meeting with clients or out-of-state investment discussions. But the deeper I read, the clearer it became that these transactions didn't align with the official revenue from his company. Large sums of money had been converted into legitimate profits through real estate chains and trust funds, only to circle back as clean returns. The notes were meticulous, but I had studied enough finance to recognize the pattern. It was a money laundering scheme. The further I dug, the more staggering the truth became. My father Robert had been involved in laundering money for at least 3 organized crime families, spanning 12 years. Tens of millions of dollars were carefully washed, funneled through layers of shell companies, and legitimized. And the most horrifying part was this. The very fortune I was set to inherit was partly born out of that operation. Just as my mind was reeling from his old notes, my phone buzzed in my hand. The name flashing across the screen was the last one I wanted to see. Victoria. I hesitated, then pressed answer. Her voice cut in instantly sharp. cold, laced with that false confidence I knew too well. Emily, I know Mother Eleanor already came to see you. So you understand the situation now. Our father wasn't as clean as you believed. All that wealth is tainted with money laundering. If you keep pushing this lawsuit, I'll take it straight to the FBI, and when that happens, you'll go down too. You're in a wheelchair, weak, inexperienced. Do you really think they'll believe you? I stayed silent, listening to her heavy breathing on the other end. Then her tone shifted lower, dripping with calculation. There's only one way out, and it's good for both of us. You withdraw the lawsuit, sign over 80% of the estate to me. In return, I'll keep this secret buried. Because we both know if the truth comes out, Father will be remembered as a criminal, and you'll be nothing but the daughter of a money launderer. Do you really want to carry that shame? I clenched the phone in my hand, my heart pounding wildly. Every word she spoke was like a blade cutting into the memory I had guarded of my father. I could hear the desperation in Victoria's voice, but what rang louder was the insatiable greed that still refused to let her go. I swallowed the lump in my throat, torn between anger and fear, knowing this was only the beginning of a battle far harsher than anything before. I lay awake for nights after that call. In the darkness, I remembered the way my father used to look at me, the words he would say. He had always told me, "You must be strong, Emily. You must face the truth, no matter how painful it is." I knew he wouldn't want me to give up, wouldn't want me to hide, but I also knew I couldn't let Victoria twist the truth into a weapon to blackmail the government. One morning, I went to see Mr. Carter. Sitting in his office, I laid my father's notebooks on the desk and said, my voice trembling, "Mr. Carter, there's something I need to tell you. My father, he laundered money." Mr. Carter was silent for a long while, his aged face heavy with thought. Finally, he nodded. I suspected as much, but Robert never admitted it. I knew he had questionable connections, unexplained trips. I warned him, but all he said was, "I know what I'm doing." Tears spilled down my cheeks. So what now? If Victoria takes this to the FBI, everything will collapse. Mr. Carter looked at me directly, his eyes stern. "Emily, you have to be prepared. Once the truth comes out, you can't hide it or deny it. The only way forward is to understand the whole picture. If Robert truly laundered money, there must have been a reason. And, perhaps, the truth is bigger than what we see." His words made me pause. Could it be that my father wasn't just a man consumed by greed? Could it be that behind those 12 years of laundering money, there was another purpose? Whatever the answer, I knew I couldn't stop here. I had to keep searching, even if it meant digging into a past that might cost me everything. That night, I reopened my father's old computer files, tracing every lead. Each account, each trust fund was like a puzzle piece pulling me deeper into the labyrinth. And as I pored over the details, my heart pounded with a chilling realization. Victoria was out there too, and she surely knew some of the truth. She wouldn't waste a single chance to use it as leverage. I knew the clock was ticking. Before Victoria could make her move, I had to strike first. I had to uncover who my father truly was and turn that truth into my shield before it could ever become a weapon in someone else's hands. Day after day, I sat in my father's study, sifting through stacks of files and old digital records. Each time I stumbled upon a strange number or an unexplained trip, my chest tightened. Everything pointed in the same direction. For 12 years, my father had carried out transactions that, on the surface, looked like money laundering. I was nearly convinced Eleanor had been right that all this wealth was built on an illegal foundation. But then, one late night, under the glow of my desk lamp on my father's old laptop, I discovered a hidden, password-protected folder. I spent hours guessing until finally, almost instinctively, I typed in my own birth date. The file opened. Inside were dozens of stored emails, all addressed to recipients with the domain at fbi.gov. I froze. My hands went cold. These emails stretched over years, meticulously detailing transactions, tracing the flow of money, identifying organized crime families in Chicago and New York. My father had not been the greedy criminal I feared. He had been secretly working with the FBI. In email after email, he reported every detail. How the funds moved, which shell companies were used, which names appeared repeatedly. He posed as a laundering middleman, but, in truth, he was recording every step and passing it on to federal agents. Again and again, I saw his words. The evidence this month is strong enough to indict, but I need more time to map the entire network. His tone carried nothing but caution, sacrifice, and resolve. One message from the lead agent brought tears to my eyes. Robert, we understand the danger you are facing. You can withdraw at any time. But if you continue, you will be the key to dismantling the largest financial crime network of the decade. We promise to protect your family. Beneath it was my father's reply, I will continue. Not for the reward, but because I want my daughters to grow up in a safer world. I lifted my hands from the keyboard, tears streaming down my face. For years, I had doubted, I had feared that my father was no longer the hero I believed him to be. But the truth was even greater. He had sacrificed his entire life, playing the role of a money launderer, when in fact he was a brave informant, quietly helping to dismantle criminal empires from the inside. As I kept reading, I uncovered something even more crucial. Most of my father's current fortune did not come from shady transactions at all, but from official rewards paid out by the FBI and the Department of Justice for his cooperation. There were documents for every payment, all perfectly legal. My father hadn't betrayed his family, hadn't betrayed me. On the contrary, he had risked his life to protect us. But Victoria and Kevin had no idea. To them, the notebooks and the transactions looked like undeniable proof that he had been laundering money. They were surely counting on using this evidence as a bargaining chip to buy their freedom with the FBI. What they could never imagine was that the very secret they thought would destroy us was actually my father's greatest legacy, the revelation that turned everything upside down. The next morning, I brought all the data I had uncovered straight to Mr. Carter. He sat frozen as he scanned the emails, then slowly nodded. I always suspected Robert was more than just a businessman. But I never guessed he was an undercover asset. My voice broke as I asked, "Will this be enough to clear his name?" Mr. Carter looked at me firmly. "Not just clear it, this will make him a silent hero. And Emily, you must prepare yourself when this truth comes to light. Victoria and Kevin's blackmail will collapse entirely." We quickly arranged a meeting with FBI representatives. I sat in the conference room, gripping the file tightly, my heart pounding. A tall agent entered, carrying a thick folder. He flipped through a few pages of emails, then looked up at me. These bear Robert's electronic signature. We worked with him for years. He was one of our most valuable sources in the anti-money laundering operation. Miss Roberts, your father saved more lives than you'll ever know. At those words, I broke down, sobs tearing out of me as though a massive weight had finally fallen from my shoulders. My father was not a criminal, he was a hero. The fortune he left me was not dirty money, it was an earned, legitimate reward. Every threat from Eleanor, every scheme from Victoria and Kevin had just turned to dust. The agent went on, his voice steady. We never made this public for Robert's safety and for the safety of his family. But now that he's gone, and with the evidence you've provided, we can close the file. If Victoria or Kevin attempt to use their so-called money laundering evidence as leverage, we will expose the truth immediately. They have no way out. I sat there in silence, tears still rolling down, but inside me swelled a pride unlike anything I had ever felt. I remembered that afternoon in the park when my father taught me how to fly a kite, telling me that if you want it to soar, you must know when to hold tight and when to let go. Perhaps that was his entire life. Holding fast to the truth, letting go of his own image, all to protect his family and society. That night, in my studio, I sat under the soft glow of the lamp and wrote the first lines of my father's story. Robert was not only a father, he was a man who lived in the shadows to protect the light. And now, that light burns on through me. Meanwhile, Victoria and Kevin still clung to their illusion, believing the money laundering secret was their lifeline. They had no idea that their trump card was, in reality, proof of my father's sacrifice as an undercover hero. And I, Emily, would be the one to reveal it, turning their blackmail scheme into their own political and legal suicide. But I knew the story couldn't end with my father's vindication. To close this chapter, I needed undeniable proof that Victoria and Kevin had conspired, evidence that left them no room to deny their crimes. Though my father had left me a shield, I understood that if they were allowed to keep maneuvering, they would twist the narrative again and perhaps even try to paint me as the villain. The FBI agreed to coordinate with me on one final operation, to lure Victoria and Kevin into admitting their scheme on record. That evening, I sat inside a surveillance van, my hands trembling as an agent handed me a small necklace with a built-in microphone. Mr. Carter sat beside me, his eyes full of concern but also encouragement. Emily, you don't have to be afraid. We'll be right outside, monitoring everything. Just stay calm and let them speak. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Fear and determination warred inside me, a strange mixture, as though I knew this was the last time I would ever have to face the ghosts of the past. The meeting place was an old, rundown cafe in the outskirts of town, the spot Victoria had chosen. When I walked in, she was already seated, with Kevin by her side, still polished in a tailored suit, but his eyes betraying his tension. I sat across from them, steadying my breath, and asked in a neutral tone, "What do you want from me?" Victoria immediately leaned forward, her voice low but laced with calculation. "Emily, you know what father did. All of this wealth he left behind is dirty money. If you're smart, you'll work with us. All you need to do is withdraw the lawsuit and sign an agreement, hand over 80% of the estate to me, and together, we'll get out of this mess." Kevin cut in, his tone sharp as glass. "Listen, kid. We have evidence. If we hand it to the FBI, you lose everything. But if you cooperate, you still get a piece, and you won't have to face a courtroom. Trust me, this is a far better deal than getting dragged into a federal case. Dev. I stared straight into their eyes, pretending to hesitate, then asked, "And if I refuse?" Victoria's lips curled into that half-smile I knew too well. "Then you'll go down with father. Who will the FBI believe, a weak little sister or us, with paperwork in hand?" I let my voice tremble, as though I were truly wavering. "So what exactly do you plan to do with the FBI?" Kevin leaned closer, dropping his voice. "We'll use the information as leverage. They want your father? We'll give him to them. In exchange, they'll let us walk free. It's the only way to survive." My heart hammered in my chest, but I knew every word was being recorded loud and clear. I nodded slowly, feigning reluctant agreement. "I'll need more time, but I want to be certain. You really plan to go through with this?" Victoria laughed, her eyes blazing with triumph. "Of course. Do you think I'm going to rot in prison? No, Emily. I'll use father's legacy to save myself. You should be thanking me for coming up with this plan." And in that exact moment, the cafe doors burst open. FBI agents swarmed inside, weapons drawn, voices ringing out with authority. "Victoria Roberts, Kevin Miles, you are under arrest for fraud, abuse, and conspiracy to commit federal extortion. You have the right to remain silent." The air in the cafe froze solid. Victoria's triumphant smirk collapsed into horror, Kevin's face drained of color, and I, sitting across from them, finally let myself breathe. Victoria's eyes bulged as she screamed, "Emily, you set me up." She thrashed wildly, but the agents pinned her wrists in steel cuffs and dragged her toward the door. Kevin, on the other hand, seemed eerily composed. He cast me one final, icy glance, and said slowly, his words cutting through the silence, "Do you really think the FBI can protect you forever? The people your father crossed, they won't spare you. His threat sent a chill down my spine. For a moment, it felt as if the entire cafe had fallen into a heavy darkness. But then an agent stepped close, his hand firm on my shoulder, his voice steady. "We'll protect you, Emily. Don't be afraid, you are not alone anymore." I sat still, watching as the two people who had manipulated my life for so long were led away in handcuffs. A storm of emotions churned inside me: relief, sorrow, and an empty ache I couldn't name. They were my sister and her husband, people I had once shared a home with, yet they had also tried to destroy me. Now, they were finally paying the price. When the police car pulled away from the cafe, I lifted my head toward the night sky. The moon shone down, soft but cold. I thought of my father, of the years he had lived in the shadows to bring light to others. Quietly, I whispered inside, "Father, I did it. The truth has won." That night, when I returned to my father's house, I stepped onto the porch and drew a long breath. No more threats, no more shadows haunting the corners of my life. Only me, my father's memory, and the road ahead wide and unbroken. I knew my journey wasn't over, but I had overcome the hardest part, facing the truth and defeating it. 6 months passed since that night in the old cafe when Victoria and Kevin were arrested. Half a year wasn't long, but it was enough to transform my world completely. Each morning I woke in my father's home, I no longer felt the weight or the darkness pressing down on the walls. The house had become something different, filled with life, with laughter, with hope. I had repainted every surface, rearranged every room, turning the place that once symbolized pain into a sanctuary that was finally, truly mine. The living room was opened up, sunlight flooding through the wide glass windows. I hung my own paintings on the walls, many in bright colors, each one a reflection of the journey I had endured. My father's study, once stacked high with financial files and secret investigation journals, was now a warm writing studio. I often spent hours at the wooden desk, filling pages of my journal or drafting scripts for my podcast. Those podcast episodes, where I shared the story of escaping abuse and reclaiming my identity, had drawn hundreds of thousands of listeners. And every time I sat there recording, I felt as though my father was still smiling beside me, urging me to keep going. But the greatest change wasn't in the house, it was in me. I founded a charity called the Robert Foundation, dedicated to supporting people with disabilities who had suffered abuse within their families. The foundation didn't just provide scholarships, it also offered legal aid, helping survivors reclaim their voices and their rights. On the day of the foundation's launch, I sat in my wheelchair in a simple blue dress and spoke before hundreds of attendees. I told my story without sugarcoating it and without hiding anything. I spoke of the pain of being cast out by my own sister, of the nights spent in a shabby motel, and of the strength I found when I finally chose to rise. When I finished, the sound of thunderous applause filled the hall, and in that moment, I knew I had turned personal tragedy into a force for change. The media quickly took notice. A documentary studio reached out, proposing a film about my father's undercover mission and about me. At first, I hesitated. I feared the world might misunderstand him, might remember him as a money launderer rather than the hero he truly was. But when I read the draft script, where they dedicated an entire chapter to honoring his silent sacrifice, I nodded and agreed. I wanted the world to know the truth. Robert was no traitor. He was a soldier in the shadows, and his daughter Emily had carried his legacy forward to bring justice. The contract was signed, and I became the central figure of a documentary set to release the following year. While I rebuilt my life, news of Victoria and Kevin slowly faded. Their trial ended with both sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by years of probation. Throughout the hearings, Victoria often looked at me, her eyes a tangled mix of regret and resentment. At times she broke down, begging me to withdraw the case. At other times she lashed out with venom, spitting that I had destroyed the family. I never wavered. I did not respond. Because I had come to understand that forgiveness isn't always the answer. Some wounds must be acknowledged for what they are: betrayal. And I was not ready to forgive. Kevin was different. He stayed cold, almost emotionless, only once in the courtroom fixing his eyes on me and whispering, "You won this time, but you don't know how many enemies you've just drawn closer." His words lingered like a shadow, but the FBI reassured me, promising their protection. I learned not to let his threat poison the new life I was building. Each evening, as I sat on the porch, gazing at the garden I had filled with roses and lavender, I felt how much I had changed. I was no longer the girl shoved out of her own home with the cruel words, "You've never been part of this family." I had become a woman who stood on her own, who knew how to set boundaries, who understood her worth. And above all, I had transformed revenge into something greater, not by inflicting pain, but by living so strongly, so brightly, that my very existence became the sharpest answer of all. In these 6 months, I had learned one lesson. The sweetest revenge is not watching others fall, but rising from the very place they tried to bury you. Victoria and Kevin were behind bars, while I was building a new life that blossomed with hope. That contrast itself was justice. I knew there would still be moments ahead, whispers, judgments, ghosts of the past. But now I had a new purpose: to help others who were powerless find their strength, just as I once found mine. And in doing so, I kept my father close, not through the scars of sorrow, but through the legacy of resilience and compassion he had left behind. Lifting my gaze to the night sky, I whispered, "Father, I did not choose hatred, I chose strength. And that is the greatest revenge of all."